The campsite sat in a shallow bend of forest where tall pines formed a natural wall against wind. A gravel loop road curved through the trees and opened into a handful of flat clearings, each one marked by a fire ring, a picnic table, and a post with small printed rules about bears, trash, and food storage. The ground was a mix of needles and compact dirt, softened in places by years of tents and footsteps. Even when it looked empty, the place carried the lingering scent of people. Smoke in the soil, cooking grease in the air, and the faint chemical smell of sunscreen that seemed to cling to everything in summer. By late morning, one site was busy. A family had arrived early enough to claim a spot close to the creek. They parked, unloaded, and moved with the rapid, scattered energy of people setting up for only a weekend. A dome tent went up first, its poles snapping into shape. A tarp was stretched between trees for shade. Folding chairs appeared. Someone shook out a sleeping bag so hard that pine needles flew. The whole clearing filled with the rustle of fabric and the small sounds of plastic latches opening and closing. Then came the cooler. It was a large, soft-sided cooler, dark fabric with thick insulation, sturdy handles, and two long zippers running along the top. It looked designed for convenience. Easy to carry, easy to open, easy to pack. It was set on the picnic table near a bag of groceries and a paper towel roll. For the family, it was just a container. For the forest, it was a smell. Cold air held scent differently than warm air. As the cooler sat in the sunlit patch near the table's edge, the smell of meat, cheese, fruit, and sweet drinks drifted outward in a faint stream. It wasn't strong enough for humans to notice, but it was enough for animals that lived on small signals. A raven noticed. It arrived without announcing itself. One moment the branches above the clearing seemed still, and the next a heavy black shape dropped to a lower limb and settled there as if it owned the air. Ravens moved with a confidence that didn't require permission. They were large enough to be taken seriously and smart enough to wait for mistakes. The bird watched the setup. It tilted its head and studied hands, not faces. It tracked where bags were placed, where wrappers were tossed, where the cooler sat. It noticed that the cooler was soft-sided and that the zippers were visible. Two thin lines of vulnerability compared to hard plastic bear boxes or latches on rigid coolers. The family kept working. A parent unpacked plates. Another carried a bundle of wood to the fire ring. A kid ran in circles with a stick, stopping only to poke at the dirt. Attention moved everywhere at once, which meant it also left gaps, moments when nobody watched the table. The raven waited for such a moment. It hopped down from the branch to the ground with a soft thud, wings barely moving. It didn't go straight to the table. That was too obvious, too fast. It walked a few steps, pecked at something small in the dirt to look casual, then angled closer. The family's dog, small, excited, not particularly trained, sniffed around near the tent. It noticed the raven only when it was already close to the picnic table. The dog gave one sharp bark and lunged a step forward. The raven didn't flee in panic. It lifted its wings, hopped backward, and landed on the bench seat, watching the dog like the dog was just another obstacle to measure. One of the adults called the dog back. The dog hesitated, then returned, drawn away by a treat or a command. The raven remained. It climbed onto the tabletop with a single hop and stood near the cooler. Close up, the bird looked even more confident. Thick beak, glossy feathers, eyes that didn't blink often. It leaned in, beak touching the fabric near the zipper seam. The cooler did not open. The zippers were shut tight, their pull tabs clipped together. Still, the raven tested. It pecked once at the metal pull. Then again, more deliberately, as if confirming the shape. It hooked the pull tab with the tip of its beak and tugged. The zipper moved maybe a millimeter. Not enough to create an opening, just enough to show it could move at all. The raven paused, head tilted, processing. Then a human voice cut in. "Hey, get out of there!" A parent stepped toward the table. The raven lifted off with a powerful flap, landing on the top of a nearby pine stump. It didn't fly away from the campsite. It just relocated, maintaining line of sight to the cooler as if it were guarding it rather than trying to steal from it. The parent checked the cooler without thinking. Hand touched the zipper pulls. They were still together, still closed. The adult clipped them more securely and moved the cooler off the table into the shade under the tarp, placing it closer to the tent where someone would pass by often. For a while, the campsite settled. Lunch was made, drinks were poured, wrappers went into a bag. The raven watched from its stump, occasionally hopping to a rock, then to a lower branch, always staying close enough to monitor. It wasn't simply hungry. Ravens also investigate. They learn. The family did not leave the cooler open. Every time someone needed something inside, they opened it briefly and closed it fully, pulling both zippers all the way until they met. The sound of the zipper, soft, gritty, became part of the bird's attention. Sound meant access. Sound meant possible error. In the early afternoon, the moment almost happened. A child opened the cooler for a soda and got distracted, leaving the lid slightly unzipped. The raven reacted instantly, dropping from its perch and gliding toward the table area. But a parent noticed at the same time. "Zip it up," they said, firm but not angry. The child pulled the zipper closed. The raven landed on the ground a few feet away and stopped, as if caught mid-plan. It stared at the cooler, then hopped sideways and pretended to peck at pine needles again. The zippers stayed shut, and because they stayed shut, the raven's role shifted from thief to watcher, an intelligent black presence that guarded the cooler not out of protection, but out of patient insistence that someday someone would forget. As the sun moved across the campsite, shadows changed. The family grew more relaxed, and that relaxation was exactly what ravens waited for. But for now, discipline held. The cooler remained closed. The pull tabs stayed together, and the raven stayed close, watching every hand that moved toward food like it was keeping score. By mid-afternoon, the campsite had settled into that familiar weekend rhythm where everything feels temporarily owned. The tent stood fully upright. Sleeping bags were unrolled. Chairs formed a loose semicircle around the fire ring, even though no fire burned yet in the heat. A tarp threw shade across part of the clearing, and the cooler sat beneath it like a centerpiece of comfort. Cold drinks, easy snacks, the promise of dinner later. The creek nearby kept up a quiet running sound that made the whole place feel calmer than it really was. Calm, to a raven, meant opportunity. People grew casual when they stopped moving urgently. They stopped checking the same things. They trusted the environment because nothing bad had happened yet. And the raven, still present, still watching, knew that trust was the doorway to mistakes. It had not left. It stayed within the same tight perimeter, shifting from stump to branch to picnic bench with steady confidence. Every relocation was strategic. It chose angles that let it see the cooler and the hands that approached it. It watched the dog, too, learning how quickly it reacted and how far it was willing to chase. It watched the adults' patterns, who was alert, who got distracted, who looked up often. The family did not consider the raven dangerous. It was just a bird, a nuisance at worst. But ravens in campgrounds were not ordinary birds. They had grown up around zippers and latches and trash bins. Their intelligence was practical, shaped by repeated successes. They learned how long it took a person to turn around. They learned what sounds meant food now versus food later. They learned where people set things down when their hands were full. The raven watched the cooler again. It understood something already. The cooler was soft, the zipper could move, and humans were the only reason it stayed closed. The bird could not overpower a closed zipper like a bear could, but it might not need to. Zippers were not walls. Zippers were mechanisms. A breeze shifted. The tarp flapped once, a sharp snap in the air. The raven reacted instantly, wings half lifting, then settling again when nothing followed. Even small noises mattered. Noise often meant distraction. Distraction meant hands leaving objects unattended. At the picnic table, a parent began preparing a late lunch. Bread came out, a jar opened with a twist. Plastic packaging crinkled. These sounds drew the raven a little closer. Not charging in, just narrowing the distance. It walked in a slow arc along the ground, head tilting, pausing to appear uninterested. The dog noticed and growled softly. One of the adults called the dog back with a tone that carried mild irritation, not urgency. The dog hesitated, then returned, drawn away by a pat on the head and the comfort of familiar attention. The raven climbed onto the bench. From there, it had an easy hop to the tabletop, and it used that advantage without hesitation. It landed near the cooler, claws clicking softly against wood. It stared at the zipper pulls for a long time, not moving, as if it were memorizing their exact shape. The cooler was shut. The pulls were clipped together, metal rings locked, a small carabiner holding them in place. The parent had been careful. They had seen the earlier test. The raven tried anyway. It hooked the pull with its beak and pulled hard. The carabiner held. The zipper did not move. The raven shifted angle, tugged again, then pecked at the fabric seam as if searching for weakness. Its intelligence did not mean instant success. It meant persistent experimentation. A child laughed, pointing. The raven froze. It didn't fly immediately. It looked toward the child, then toward the adults, reading their body language. No one moved fast. No one shouted. That meant the raven could remain longer without punishment. Then an adult stepped forward. Off! The voice was sharper now. The adult slapped the tabletop, not near the raven, but hard enough to make a sudden sound. The raven lifted off, wings beating once, and landed in the nearest pine, where it resumed watching like it had only been repositioned rather than defeated. The adult checked the cooler again. The zippers were still shut. The carabiner still held. The adult left it where it was, confident. The family went back to their lunch. That confidence was what the raven wanted. Because a raven doesn't always win by forcing entry. Sometimes it wins by waiting until the entry is made by someone else. Later, the family prepared to leave the campsite briefly. They wanted to walk down to the creek's deeper bend and let the kids throw stones into the water. It was close, only a few minutes away. They didn't pack up. They didn't lock everything in the vehicle. They did what most campers did when they believed they were still basically here. They stood, gathered a towel, grabbed hats, and started toward the creek. The cooler stayed under the tarp. The zippers stayed shut. But the campsite was now unattended. The raven shifted immediately. It moved down from the tree, landing on the table again with controlled confidence. It walked straight to the cooler this time. No pretending to peck at needles, no casual arc. The humans had left. The dog had followed them. The field of risk had changed. The raven examined the zipper pulls again. It pecked at the carabiner. It tugged. It twisted its head to see if it could slide the ring open. It did not succeed. The clip held, stubborn and simple. So it changed tactic. It walked to the edge of the table and scanned the campsite for something easier. Ravens rarely fixate on a single goal when another is available. It spotted a grocery bag that had been left on the bench. Paper, slightly crumpled, smelling faintly of chips. It hopped to it, stabbed the paper once, tearing a clean slit. Inside was a bag of crackers. The raven pulled it out with a quick jerk, dropping it on the ground. It began pecking at the plastic seam, testing for a tear point. The sound of crinkling plastic filled the quiet clearing. Then footsteps returned. The family came back sooner than expected. A child had gotten bored quickly. The adults heard the plastic noise before they fully saw the raven. One of them shouted, louder this time, and the raven launched away, lifting into the trees with the cracker bag torn but not fully opened. The adult moved fast to gather things. The grocery bag was moved into the car. Loose food was packed away. The cooler zippers were checked, still shut. The carabiner was tightened again. The family didn't yell at the bird anymore. They simply changed their behavior. That was the real victory for the raven, even without getting into the cooler. It had forced the humans to treat the campsite like a contested space rather than private property. As evening approached, the air cooled slightly. The raven remained nearby, perched higher now, watching with a calmer posture. It had learned something. The cooler was secured better than average, but the humans still left other food unprotected when they relaxed. It would keep watching, because patience was not passive. It was strategy, and as long as the zippers stayed shut, the raven's attention would expand outward, searching for the next weak point, waiting for the moment the campsite forgot, even briefly, that intelligence in black feathers was always paying attention.